Okay, so the question for today is, someone asked me this yesterday. They want to go on a cruise, and the boat's going to be in the water on Shabbat. That's a tough one, man. It's a tough one. They want to go on a cruise, a boat, What kind? I don't know. Takes off from Long Beach, and it's going to stop at Cabo, and it's going to go, I don't know where it's going to go. And so it's actually really complicated halakha. Well, let's try to address what we can in 10-15 minutes. And so it starts in the Gemara. In Gemara and Shabbat discusses whether you can take off on a ship before Shabbat. Also, this is going to touch a little bit of a Gemara on Iruvin, because there might be an issue of traveling. You're not allowed to travel a certain distance on Shabbat outside of the Tehum, the boundaries of a city. And so the boats and the trains and such, they travel very far, and so you might be violating that. So we have to discuss all of this. Hacham Ovadia talks about Allah v'Shalom. He talks about this in Yehave daat, and also Hacham David Shalita and Hacham Yitzhak, all his sons talk about it. But Hacham Yitzhak Yosef, he gives a nice background. So I'm going to read you a few reasons what would be the problem with going on a boat that's going to be on Shabbat. We're not talking about leaving on Shabbat. Let's say you want to leave Friday or Thursday. So Gemara Shabbat says that you're not en mafligim b'sefina pachot min gimel yamim kolam Shabbat. The Gemara Shabbat says you're not allowed to board a boat 3 days or less before Shabbat. And so Thursday, Friday, and we'll have to talk about Wednesday. But let's just say for sure right now, Thursday, Friday, you're not allowed to take off if it's 3 days before Shabbat, says the Gemara. What are we talking about, says the Gemara? The Dvar Hareshut. If it's it's an optional trip. It's not a mitzvah. About the Dvar mitzvah, if it's a mitzvah, mutar, you're allowed to travel even, let's say, Friday. We take off, let's say, Friday, even though you'll know you'll be on the boat on Shabbat. If it's for a mitzvah, says the Gemara, uposek imo sheishbot, you have to tell the crew, I want you to stop the boat on Saturday. Ve'eno shovet, but they don't have to listen to you. Even if they don't listen to you, as long as you try. You tell them, I don't want you to travel on Saturday. If they don't listen to you and the boat keeps going, it's okay, as long as it's for a mitzvah. This is what the Gemara says. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Ein tzarich. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, it's allowed to travel. Rambam and Maran Shulchan Aruch say as follows. Maran Shulchan Aruch, Siman 248, I'm going to read you his words, just like the Rambam's words, the same words. Maran Shulchan Aruch says, Mutar le'aflig b'sefina, afilu be'erev Shabbat, im holech l'dbar mitzvah. You're allowed to take off, depart, the boat, the cruise, even Friday, as long as what you're doing is for a mitzvah. Uposek imo sheishbot, and you tell the captain that you want to stop the boat on Saturday. But if he doesn't listen to you, it's fine. He doesn't have to listen to you. But if it's for just a joyous vacation, not a mitzvah, says Maran Shulchan Aruch, en mafligim b'sefina pachot min shalosha yamim kodem Shabbat. Maran Shulchan Aruch holds if it's not for a mitzvah, you cannot depart 3 days before Shabbat. You have to depart 4 days before Shabbat or more. Says Maran Shulchan Aruch, v'im derech mu'at, if it's a very short trip, kemo mitzur letzidon, she'en benehem ki im mehalech yom echad. It's only 1 day trip. It's not a very long journey. Mutar le'aflig be'erev Shabbat baboker. Says Maran, you're allowed to go. We're talking about now a 2 day journey. You're not allowed to, unless it's a mitzvah. But in cities where they don't ever depart on Friday, ever, even for a 1 day trip, then you have to follow the rule of the city and not go. Says Maran Shulchan Aruch further. This that we said, that you're not allowed to depart your cruise ship if it's 3 days or less before Shabbat. What is the reason? Mishum onik Shabbat. Because you're not going to enjoy the Shabbat when you're on the boat, says Maran. How do you say throw? Throwing up. Kai. Veki. He says Vekiya. Is the first 3 days on the boat, you're going to be very seasick, you're going to not be happy, you're not going to be moving around. It's not going to be enjoyable. And also, we're only talking about traveling in salty seawater that you're not allowed to, says Maran Shulchan Aruch. Alva b'neharot, if it's a river with clear water, non-salty water, in shum sa'ad lemafligim bahem. There's no getting seasick really on a river. Ulefichach mutar leaflig bahem afil be'erev Shabbat. So Maran Shulchan Aruch says, even if it's Friday and you're taking off in a river, it's allowed. There's no seasickness over there, even Friday. Vihu, as long as shelo yehadu alano she'en be'amkam asar tefahim. You have to make sure. I'll say the opposite way. You have to not know that the water is 10 tefahim or less. That's what Maran Shulchan Aruch says. So 10 tefahim is 80 centimeters. And so if you know for sure that you'll be traveling on shallow waters, which is 80 centimeters or less, Maran Shulchan Aruch says you can't do it. If you know for sure. He doesn't say you have to know for sure the water is deep. He says if you have to, as long as you don't know the water is shallow. If you're not sure what the water is, it's allowed. Maran Shulchan Aruch says. Now, says Maran Shulchan Aruch, says the Ramah, Ramoshi Isserlis, V'chen b'sefina she'yisrecha Yisrael labor l'dim melacha b'Shabbat. That's the next seif. Hold on, let me get the next seif. Now, what is the reason for this 10 tefahim water thickness? Because the Gemara in Eruvin has a question whether if you're not allowed, like I said, you're not allowed to travel 12 mil on Shabbat. You're not allowed to travel a great distance of space on Shabbat because of the laws of tihumin, of boundaries. The Gemara in Eruvin asks a question and says, does this apply 10 tefahim above the land? Let's say, for example, you have the ability you have like sticks standing up and you can jump from one to another, jumping high in the ground. 10 tefahim above, you want to jump onto the next pillar, the next pillar, the next pillar. You want to do this for like, 10 miles. And so the Gemara has a question, does the law of tihumin apply 10 tefahim in the air? And we're not sure. And the Gemara says, what's the difference? How is this ever going to happen? And one of the options is traveling in a boat. If you're traveling in a boat, the water is 10 tefahim above the land. It's 80 centimeters above the land. And so we're not sure if the laws of tihumin apply. And so therefore, Maran Shulchan Aruch says, if the water is above 10 tefahim and it's 80 centimeters, you wouldn't have the problem of tihumin, because the Gemara just said maybe tihumin doesn't apply above 10, and it's a yisud rabbanan lekula. And if you're not sure, then it's safik lekula. Only if you know for sure that it's going to be in very, very shallow water, you're going to have a problem. That's the laws of tihumin. Now, the Ramah is a very lenient Ramah. It's not very common. The Ramah is very lenient. He's Ashkenaz. Ramesh Isserlis is more lenient than the Maran Shulchan Aruch. And he writes, Maran Shulchan Aruch says, Hecha dimota le'aflig be'erev Shabbat. This that I told you that you can travel on Friday, if it's a short trip, Im nichnas b'sefina me'erev Shabbat tekana b'shevita. So the Ramah says, Yesh omrim da'afil yatsa min sefina shari. Some say you can even leave the boat, because once you dock the boat, it's fine, you got it. V'yesh she'osin kiddush b'sefina. And the Ramah says further, I want to find the next one. The Ramah says, everything's a mitzvah, basically. I'll find it for you. Moshe Isserlis holds almost everything is called a mitzvah. Business trip might be mitzvah. Yeah, everything's a mitzvah. I can't find it. Moshe Isserlis says everything's a mitzvah. Maran Shulchan Aruch says going to Israel is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to go to Israel, to move to Israel. Going to help a yeshiva, if you need to travel by boat, that's a mitzvah. Moshe Isserlis, the Ramah says maybe even business is a mitzvah. Anything is a mitzvah, just not vacation.
You know why it's mitzvah?
Why?
Because you get out of the house and you give your wife.
You give your wife, she's coming with you. Just not vacation. And so the Ramah is very lenient on this. Okay. Now, what are the possible problems with this? So I'll just read it very, very quickly. Hakam Yitzhak Yosef says in Yalkut Yosef as follows. He says, there are multiple reasons given why you may not travel on a boat on Shabbat, 3 days before Shabbat. Rabbeinu Hananel says that we're talking about tihumin. It's just a problem of the 80 centimeters, like I said, as the water may not be so shallow, so deep. The second answer is the Bahai Gaon says that the isud is because you'll be floating on the water, and we know that you shouldn't swim on Shabbat. It's also another complicated halacha, but let's just say regular, because the gezerah of swimming is because you might make a raft. And so if you can't swim on Shabbat because you might make a raft, then how could you go on a boat on Shabbat? You for sure might make a raft. If something breaks or something, you might have to make a raft. Now, swimming on Shabbat, I have to make a disclaimer. Very complicated halakha. Actually, is a class on YouTube we made from this years ago. I'm not talking about a swimming pool. It's very complicated. So don't take that halakha lama'aseh. You shouldn't do it anyway, but it's possible that it's allowed. The third reason here is the daat harif ve'harambam. The Rif and the Rambam say that the problem here is bitul onik Shabbat. Why? Because the atmosphere in the sea is not going to be pleasant in the beginning, and it's going to shake you around, and it's going to give you headaches and vomit and nausea and all this. As it says in Tehillim, Kol ochel tetarev nafsham ve'yagilu Shaarey Yerushalayim Yoredei hayam ba'oniyot oseh lecha mayim rabim. And so it says over here, Ya'alu shamayim yadu tehomot nafsham bera'at titmogag. We have in Tehillim how it says that you get seasick when you're in the ocean, and so we don't want you to be sick on Shabbat. That's the third reason. But after 3 days already, you get used to it. The fourth reason is the reason of the Ba'al Me'or, who writes that the water, anytime you go out to journey in the sea, it's always a sakana, it's dangerous. And God forbid, if something happens to the boat, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to save your life. You have to do whatever you have to do to save your life. So you're putting yourself in a position where you know that it might be dangerous. Now these days might be different. It might be dangerous, and you may have to break off something and make a boat and save your life. And so you shouldn't do this intentionally. The fifth reason is because people are doing things for you on Shabbat. The people that are working on the boat, they're driving the boat, they're doing all the things for you on Shabbat. We'll talk about that in a second. Another reason is because you might have to take over driving the boat. The Tosafot says maybe. And another reason is because Beit Shammai holds you shouldn't do anything on Shabbat that you could have done before Shabbat. So there's a bunch of reasons here. Now, Hacham Ovadia, in Yehave daat, he was asked the question, but he doesn't really talk about how many days before. He was just asked the question, if someone's on a long journey, and it's going to be on Shabbat also. That was the question they asked him, can I go on this journey? He didn't really get into how many days before Shabbat. And so he brings here the opinion that there's no problem going as long as the crew is goy. If the crew is Jewish, you have a problem. If the captain is Jewish, you have a problem, because the Jewish people cannot break Shabbat for you. And if most of the people on the boat are Jewish, you also have a problem. Because then the people, the goyim, are doing most of their work for the Jews. And so really he says you want to go on a boat that's captained and the crew is not Jewish. Majority of the ship is also not Jewish. The people, the guests on the ship also would not be Jewish. He brings here very interestingly from Rav Abdallah Somech. Rav Abdallah Somech was a great Gaon from Iraq. He was the rabbi of the Ben Ish Hai. His niece married the Ben Ish Hai. And Rav Abdallah Somech in his Sefer Zibhai Sedek, he writes as follows. He says, "B'davar nesi'ah be'oniyah shel esh b'Shabbat." Regarding traveling in a fiery boat, I guess a steamboat on Shabbat, hadavar pashut she'isur gamurhu. Rav Abdallah Somech says it's absolutely forbidden, even if you got on 5 days before, on Sunday. I don't care when you went on, because you're traveling too far in Shabbat, says Abdallah Somech. I was like, what in the world? Why? Why would you say it's asur? We just said if the water is not deep, if the water is not shallow, there is no isur tehumin. You're allowed to travel on deep water on Shabbat. If you got on Sunday, Maran Shulchan says you can go on as long as you don't go 3 days before. Why would Abdallah Somech be more strict than the Nabam and the Hanuch? He couldn't figure it out. And then Abe, you have a spotlight on this one. He says, then he saw a book by Rabbi Avraham Gabai in London. He says Shalita here, so I don't know if he's still alive, this rabbi.
He's right there.
You know? He says there's a Rabbi Avraham Gabai in London, Shalita, and he adds one more word in his version of Abdallah Somech. In his words, he says, Oniyah shel esh, a boat of fire, ha'olechet bi'abasha, that's traveling on the land. It's a train he's talking about, not a boat. So Chacham says, he wasn't talking about a boat that's asud. A train, and everyone agrees. You can't travel on a train on Shabbat. Even if you got on right before Shabbat. The train is much worse. Why? Because the ground is you don't have the leniency of the deep water. We said the deep water gives you leniency. And so now, one more thing Chacham brings here. He says the Rebbe from Lubavitch Rebbe, he said he argued with all the Rabbanei Eretz HaKodesh. Chacham says he argued against all the rabbis in Israel, and he said if you're on a boat and the crew is Jewish, you must stop the boat. You cannot keep going. And it sounds like a lot of rabbis in Israel told the Israeli boat companies, whatever, as long as you started before Shabbat, put it on autopilot and whatever. The Lubavitch Rebbe, he was very against it. He says, afilu if it's going often automati, even if it's going on autopilot, and no one has to do anything, it's not good. He says he checked with expert sailors and he asked people letters and he said, you are violating Shabbat. And he said, you must stop the boat. Either dock the boat or turn it off in the middle of the sea and let it float. And Chamadia brings here Moshe Feinstein, who argued with the Lubavitch Rebbe. And Moshe Feinstein said, once the boat's already going, let it continue. And Chamadia says, with forgiveness to Moshe Feinstein, I don't agree with you. He holds like the Lubavitch Rebbe. And he says, if the crew is Jewish, if the captain is Jewish, you cannot continue the sea on the journey on Shabbat. You must stop it. So Chamadia says in his Yehave daat, mutal l'nsua be'oniya shel kitot. You can go on a steamboat that you got on 3 days before Shabbat. Asher the cabinet and the savat ha'ovdim and all the crew goyim are non-Jews. Even though they're continuing the journey on Shabbat. It's not a problem of traveling distances because we said the water is deep. That the cabinet and the crew is Yehudim. If they're Jewish, you shouldn't do it. Because you're going to benefit from other people's work on Shabbat. This is Hacham Ovadia, but he doesn't discuss the days. Hacham David Yosef, Hacham Ovadia, Hacham Yitzhak Yosef, he discusses how many days, and I'll do it very, very quickly. This is the words of Hacham Yitzhak Yosef. Mutar l'nsua be'oniya shel kitot. You're allowed to travel in a steamboat that's going on Shabbat. Asher rava hobel ve'amelachim v'rob hanosiim shelahim goyim. The captain, the crew, and majority of the guests are goy. Then you can continue the journey on Shabbat. Even though they're traveling on Shabbat. It's not a problem of traveling distances because of the water. Even if it's on Friday that it takes off, if it's the bar mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah you're going for, like Maran Shulchan says, a mitzvah is different. Or if it's a reshut, if it's just a vacation, no. What's a mitzvah? I want to go move to Israel, or I want to go collect money, things like that. Chacham Yitzhak says, you don't have to tell the crew, stop the boat on Shabbat. Like Maran Shulchan says, you have to do this. Chacham Yitzhak says, they're not going to listen to you anyway. Don't tell them anything, just get on the boat. He's more lenient to Maran Shulchan Aruch. You know they're not going to listen to you. The cruise is not going to care what you say. And so you don't have to tell them, don't make a big deal and tell them, I want you to stop on Shabbat, like Maran Shulchan Aruch says you have to do. Now, he says over here, as long as you don't know that the water will be shallow. If you happen to be told, or whatever, someone tells you, by the way, we're traveling on extremely shallow waters, you can't do it. But most people will never know such a thing, and I can't imagine the boats will travel on such shallow waters. They can't go on the shallow waters like that. Yeah. If it's just an optional, joyous trip, not mitzvah, just a vacation, you cannot go if it's taking off 3 days before Shabbat. And some people say, this is the Rama, I have to go for work, which is for my business. Maybe it's a mitzvah, maybe it's not. But even these days, on cruise ships where there's no one getting sick as much as used to be, still, if it's just for pleasure, you should not take off 3 days before Shabbat. Unless you're a very, very well-traveled seaman. You travel a lot. You're always there, and you know you won't be sick. You know you will not get sick. You'll enjoy your Shabbat for sure. Maybe you could do it. That the cabinet and the crew, if it's a Jewish crew and a Jewish pilot captain, you cannot take off even 5 days before, even from Sunday. It's going to be on the order on Shabbat by a Jewish crew? No, because you cannot do it. These days, like Chacham Ovadia says with Rabbi Lubavitch Rebbe, stop the boat. There's no danger from stopping a boat in the middle of the sea. Nothing's going to happen. Just let it sit there. Okay. Now, Chacham Yitzhak Yosef says forward, he says on the bottom here that he spoke with his father. Gam bizman hazeh, he says, even these days, anu ro'im, we see, she'im kol ha'shipurim ve'anuhiyot, shebe'oniyot, all the modern technology and the boats they make these days, You still get sick. People wanted to say these days it doesn't happen anymore. And they get sick with seasickness. And further, you're going to start making it too complicated. Everyone's going to say, no, I'll get sick. I won't get sick. People are going to break the law. It's not allowed to take this leniency and travel for pleasure within 3 days of Shabbat, even if you say, oh, I'm not going to be sick. And he says, if you're a sailor that you always go, you can do it. And that's what Chacham Ovadia told me also. One last thing, and we'll wrap. Chacham David Yosef talks about this at length in his sefer. Way too long to discuss here. And so I'll just bring two things he says here. He says the same thing everyone else said, that you can't travel for pleasure 3 days before. He brings a leniency here, Chacham David Yosef, and he says, Adam shehu ragil b'nesi'ah b'sefinot, if you're very accustomed to traveling by sea, and you know for sure you will not be sick at all, and the boat is crewed by goyim, and most of the guests on the boat are goyim, and the captain is a goy, so everything's going to happen with goyim, and you will not need a Jew to do anything. Then fine, if you really want to go, we'll let you go Friday. If you can guarantee you never get seasick. But it's not very clear that this heter works for everyone. But if someone will get seasick, he cannot go. He says forward more, I'll skip a little bit here. If you know that when you travel on Sunday, that they're not going to stop the boat on Shabbat. If it's Yehudim, you can't go on the boat. If they're going to continue driving and it's Jewish, even on Sunday, like Chacham Yitzhak said, you can't go. According to the Ashkenazim, Ashkenazim are more lenient. If you're going, you're allowed to. Sfaradim are more strict on this one. And I want to read you one last thing. Yeah.
I heard that.
We're more strict, yeah. One last thing. This that we said you can't travel 3 days before Shabbat, which day is the third day before Shabbat? It's a big question. The daat many of the poskim hold, it starts Wednesday night, that you cannot go. Wednesday night. But Wednesday, you could. That's what a lot of poskim hold. So how would that work? Because you're on the boat Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. It's kind of lenient. Other people are strict, and they hold that it starts Tuesday night, which means you're not allowed to travel Wednesday. If it's possible, you should be strict and not travel Wednesday as well. And so if someone travels on Wednesday, they have what to rely upon. But if you have a choice, better to travel on Tuesday. And so therefore, if it comes to a cruise, if it was business or something like that, maybe. But if it's just if it's a simple vacation cruise, it's going to be really, really hard to let someone travel 3 days beforehand. This person that asked me, when I told them this, they said, no, the boat's taking off Monday. I said, so what are you asking me for? They said, no, the boat's taking off Monday, but it's going to dock in different cities. So don't get off the boat, maybe. Stay on the boat. When it docks in Cabo, technically you might be allowed to get off the boat if it docks before Shabbat, but you may have a problem taking your stuff off the boat, because that's the shoot and getting it back on Shabbat. So it seems to me, you chime in here if you want to, it seems to me that if they travel on Monday, they stay on the boat, and they don't get off the boat, it should be fine as long as they left on Monday. But don't take a cruise that's going to travel on Shabbat. It's a big problem.
My mom got bad advice. She said as long as you're on by Friday and you don't get off until after Shabbat.
Yeah, it seems that's not the case. It seems that's not the case. Unless it's the Dvar Mitzvah. What I don't know is, and I really don't know this, kosher cruises, it's most of the guests are Jews. Do they travel on the holiday on Shabbat? I've never been on one. Yoshua goes on the mountain. Yoshua, you go on the cruise, Ken? You go on kosher cruises? Kosher cruise you go on?
Kosher food?
Cruise, the cruise ship. Tell them in Hebrew.
Cruise.
No, I don't think
That's not a cruise.
They have like Pesach cruises, no?
He wasn't on it.
Do they travel on Shabbat?
No.
According to this, they should stop the boat on Shabbat.
The kosher cruises, they stop for Shabbat?
No,
They
we
keep
don't.
going?
לא, זה לא קרוז נורמלי, קרוז של...
Kosher.
Yeah.
Yeah, they go on the holiday, on Shabbat.
ביום טוב?
The most of the guests are Jews.
כי כל המפעילי המכונה, קפיטן, all the
Goyim.
גויים.
But the guests, the people.
Only the kitchen is kosher. There's a kosher, but
It seems from here that unless they call that a mitzvah somehow.
I want to know what they consider to be Jewish.
That's a good question also.
You know, because
Yeah.
that might.
Anyway, it's a complicated question. The answer is, I don't know how to. Yeah, we have Kaddish or no? I don't think so.